Ward Trucking, one of the oldest family-owned trucking businesses in the United States. Started during the Great Depression, this company persevered through tough market changes, while numerous other trucking conglomerates have folded. It's a story of determination, persistence, and commitment through 3 generations of families and employees. Now, here's the story of the people behind the business of Ward Trucking, the early years.
Ward Trucking was founded in May of 1931, so in 1996 we celebrate our 65th anniversary. And we felt it would be a good thing to have some of these early happenings recorded. We do have a pretty decent written record of the history of the company from 1952 up until now through our company newspaper. But prior to 1952, we don't have very many things written, and we have to depend a good bit on old memories. So today we've asked 2 of our retired veterans to come with us today, and we'll introduce them in just a minute. We have Glenn Wible and Marvin Kelly, better known as Jake Kelly. But let me tell you just a little bit about how we started back in 1931. As the story goes, it was a 1-truck, 2-man operation with Bill Ward, the founder of the company, and his helper Bob Kelly. And as the story goes, when they finished a trip down from the Cumberland Valley down around Chambersburg down into New York hauling eggs, they took stock one afternoon and found out after they paid for their fuel and all the other expenses, they had $7.50 between them. And they had to make a decision at that time whether to stay in the trucking business or whether to find something a little more lucrative. And thank goodness for all of us, and past and present employees, they made the decision to stay in the business. And now we're working on the 3rd generation of Wards, of the Ward family. And this is highly unusual that 3 generations have remained active. And another thing we like to talk about now is even with our 3rd generation, you can still talk to someone whose name is on the side of the truck. And that's very unusual, not only in the trucking business, but in most industries nowadays. As I said, we have 2 gentlemen with us, and first I'd like to introduce Glenn Wible. To my left over here, Glenn is a longtime veteran of the company, former director of operations. And Glenn, can you tell us just a little bit about the jobs you held with the company and so on?
The fellow that I saw first was turned out to be Bill Yingling. He was kind of a traffic man, driver, a little bit of all. So I asked him where Mr. Ward's office was located, and he said Mr. Ward doesn't have an office, but he's out back there doing some work in the trailer. So I walked around the back, and there he is with work clothes on. He had his tools there, and he had the wheels off. He was relining the brakes. So I walked over and said, "You Mr. Ward?" And he said, "My name is Bill Ward. I like for employees to call me Bill. I'm just an employee." So he said, "Okay, what can I do for you?" I told him I was looking for a job near home. I live in Altoona. And he said, "Well, you'd have to make a trial trip to Harrisburg and back." And I arranged to make it that night. Walked around to another trailer he had there, and he had, I think, about 6 or 8 trailers altogether total, because all the trailers were in Altoona. There were none at Harrisburg, and because there were no tractors in Harrisburg. And I said, "Well, you got the wheels off of this one too?" And he said, "Yeah, I took the brakes off of that one to put on this one here because things are a little tight." And he said, "Just take parts off till I get things going here a little bit." And he said, "Everything will be all right." So I took a trial run that night, and 2 weeks later I went to work for him.
Let me just take a second and introduce Jake Kelly. Jake, I have to admit, was my first boss when I came with Ward Trucking when I worked here on the platform in high school. So we've got a long and I think a good relationship. So Jake, I'd like you to just tell a little bit about yourself also.
Well, I started with Bill in 1935. I was what you would call a dock man, but there was no dock. We carried it from the back of the trailer into the building, and then we loaded the trucks from the building onto the truck.
Of course, there was no regulation in the trucking industry at all. You could pretty much go where you wanted to go. Then in 1935, when the Motor Carrier Act was passed, the carriers who were operating in a given territory were granted grandfather rights. So in those early years, we had the operating rights from 16 central Pennsylvania counties into the New York, New Jersey area.
There were no interline carriers over New York. And we started getting a few of them in at Weehawken, New Jersey.
Right. And you mentioned about New York being a pretty rough area. When we first moved into Weehawken, it was a little rough down there too.
Weehawken was rough, but not quite as rough as New York. New York was, and incidentally, Times Square is on 42nd Street and 5th Avenue in New York, and we were on 9th Avenue and 39th Street, so that's how close we were to
well, of course, being a short-haul carrier, as we talked a little bit earlier, that's why we had to go into so much interchange business.
That's exactly right.
Because, you know, if we wanted to sell something, again, talking about sales, if we wanted to sell service up into New England or service to the Midwest or the Far West or the Southwest or South, wherever, we had to depend on giving freight to another carrier. And at one time, as you'll recall, we had concurrences with over 250 different motor carriers. We interchanged freight with them daily.
Of course, I remember my father and mother, both of whom started this company in 1931, and from very, very small beginnings. Our really first terminal was in our house, and the dispatch was in our house. And I can remember my father calling our customers from our house. He would call to try and arrange pickups and deliveries. At one time, we even had over-the-road drivers who would stay in our house as they reached one end of their run. He was always very, very concerned about the well-being of our people, devoted much of his time, really the majority of his time, to make sure that they were treated fairly. He established in 1948 a voluntary profit-sharing plan, which is still in existence. It was the first plan of that nature in the trucking industry in the United States.
What was the first tractor you drove, Glenn, for Ward?
Well, really in Harrisburg, you didn't have one assigned to you. There was old number 4, which had a homemade cab on it. It was a good tractor, but the cab on there was a homemade job. It looked like a toilet on there with a door in the side. And then there was 20, 21, and 22 barber chairs. Remember the barber chairs? You turn the handle, lay back, sleep like a barber chair. 18 had a barber chair. And then
they were excuse me, they were autocars also?
Autocars and Max. At that time, there was no internationals. DS50s with 60 motors in it, they called it. Equivalent to EQ Max.
Right.
He ordered 4 EQ Max during the war. They were hard to get. And in the meantime, old Pop Ballsball at Harrisburg was driving a straight job Mack. And when he started running about 35, 40 miles an hour, he was really pumping her down the highway. But anyway, the motor blew up on it. And they blamed old Pop Ballsball for speeding it up, and Bill Ward wouldn't stand for that. They put another motor in, it was going to charge Bill Ward for it, which was still under warranty, as far as mileage is concerned. So he said, okay, but he said, just cancel the EQ Max I have ordered 4 of them. He said, you're not going to say that about a man that takes care of a truck like he does. He'd take it home with him to wipe it off every night. So anyway, he went over to Harry Rouser at the International place and said, you always wanted to sell me trucks. So if you can get me 4 international tractors within a couple weeks, I'll buy them and I'll cancel the EQs. And they did.
I guess I can think of some of the more amusing times where when I first came to work here, one of the group of road drivers used to comment how they would have problems getting over Crescent Mountain, and they would form a convoy, and the convoy would get to the point where they would almost be like a train. They would push each other up over the mountain. So it was an interesting observation. Obviously, that would not go in today's highway system.
When I first came here, they had metal drawers, and they used addressographs to
put the addresses on the statements, and you'd pull a drawer out, and you might have had, in them days, probably 4 drawers of statements. Now I'm sure they've got thousands of counts on the computer. The computer prints up the statement each time automatically. Special instructions, which you used to have to remember in your head, now it comes out automatically on the computer. I was here when W.W. Ward was here. He was something. Privilege I had to work around a gentleman like that. Let's roll up our sleeves.
I remember going in for the interview, and at that time his son G. Bill Ward was president, and I interviewed with G. Bill, and then W.W. happened to come into the office and talk with me at that time. So he was an impressive man to be around, and from knowing what all he's done for the area with a job for Joe's and everything back in the 60s, that he brought in a lot of industries into the area. The railroad was big at that time, but he had brought in a lot of the plants like SKF, Sylvania, and some of those are still here now, but he was pretty instrumental in bringing in jobs for the Altoona area.
I know one time a telephone man was there and we were discussing some trouble, because I used to be able to, believe it or not, pinpoint trouble on different lines. And we were discussing it and I answered the phone, "Good morning, Ward, trouble." And fortunately for me, it was a customer that knew me real well. And he said, "Ellie, Ward, trouble."
Well, there was a number of things that have changed over the years. The evolution of engines, transmissions, differentials, they've come to a point where we used to expect 300,000 miles, and now we can expect, we've got engines that's running in excess of 750,000 miles. We've gone from Cummins to an international V8 to a V8 GMC, and now we're back to a Detroit 6-cylinder.
The relationship I think the employees had with one another was always good. We had a good rapport with the management, and a fine company to work for. I think they're the highlights. And the nice thing about my job was meeting people out in the retail store area and getting to know a different aspect of the job beside being shut in all the time.
I always liked to work with figures, and I was lucky enough to get a job in the accounting department. Worked with figures for 40 years. I just enjoyed that part of the business. I came in, when Ward really started to grow, was able to grow with the company. It was just 40 years of excellent employment. I remember sitting in the office one evening after everyone had left. All the lights were on. W.W. walked out and said to me, I don't have any stock in the electric company. I want you to use all the lights that you need, but turn off all that you don't need."
One of the big changes that I remember was whenever we had the old terminal in North Bergen. They built the big terminal in Little Falls, and it was a big building and magnificent. And for the road drivers, that was really a big change, because there we had a motel to stay in, and all right on premises.
My main was pickup and delivery tractor-trailer driver, and I ran from Altoona through the Du Bois terminal. Once I left Altoona, I was responsible to the Du Bois terminal to get their freight back at night. My fondest memory is of W.W. himself. William Ward himself hired me as an employee, and him and I over the years had a good relationship together. And I was always fond of the man, and I knew the Ward family from the time they were young kids until they all growed up, and it was a great family relationship, and Ward Trucking was very, very good to me over the 30 years that I spent with them.
I'd like to thank Ward's. I went to work there with a handicap, and I worked there all my life. I done the job that I was supposed to do, and I was glad that somebody gave me the opportunity to do it. And I appreciate Ward's doing that for me. Otherwise, I don't know where I'd have been today.
First time I ever met W.W., we was down at the building where the Salvation Army is right now. And as you went in the side door, right around the corner was a large scale that you weighed freight with.
And at that time, John Cunningham was a foreman, and he said, okay, he said, let's all go eat. So I walked over to the scales, and I'm trying to get myself, see how much I weighed. And the scales kept going up and down and up and down. I couldn't figure it out, and I turned around. And here's WW with his foot on the scale, and he'd take it off and put it on. And I just sort of looked at him. He said, you know, he said, I'm paying you to work. He said, not to play. And I said, well, I'm on my dinner hour. He said, thank goodness for that.
That was the general office building we moved into in 1950. We were there from 1950 to 1969. It's on 7th Avenue and 1st Street, and the Altoona terminal was located directly behind that. William W. Ward on the right there taking delivery of a new international tractor from Harry Rouser, who was then the district manager for International in Altoona. It's just a picture of one of the tractor trailers sometime in the 1950s, and it was in the yard at the Altoona terminal, and that's one of our original shop or maintenance foreman, Ray Kreider. He was one of the early pioneers in the business. That was another tractor trailer unit just taken in front of our Du Bois terminal, and it was one of the early cab-over tractors that we utilized for many years. And just as a point of information, that Ship the Wardway on the side, we've used that slogan, as you know, for many years. Back in the old days, they were all hand-painted on every trailer. Painted from Altoona by the name of Obernator. Hand-painted every one of the tractors. Now we put them on with decals, so there's a tremendous difference. The fellow on the left is J. Byron Hoover. We used to call him Andy Hoover, one of our early road drivers, receiving a Safe Driving Award from then President William W. Ward. And By Hoover, incidentally, was one of the he was the first driver we had that drove 30 consecutive years without an accident. We've had 5 since that time. That's another early road driver in the center there holding his Driver of the Month plaque from the Pennsylvania Motor Truck Association. It's Walt Hugar, with, of course, Bill Ward on the right, and I think that's D. Emmert Broombaugh, second from the right. This award was presented in Harrisburg. On the left here is another road driver who was named as Pennsylvania Driver of the Month, Merle Foreman and his wife, and William W. Ward. That's Director of Operations Glenn Wible on the left, and he's presenting 10-year safe driving watches to 3 road drivers. On the right is Glenn Miller, in the center is Luke Howman, and the other one is Herb Probbins. This was our original terminal in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. This is even earlier. We operated out of a, I guess it was like a surplus Quonset hut from World War II up in Du Bois. This is Kenny Miller. Kenny worked 30 plus, maybe 35 years for the company way back. He was there when I was there in high school in 1942, and he was there before that, but he was actually, he had done some driving and ended up as the, what we call him a dock foreman. Nowadays they're platform supervisors in Altoona. That was just a picture of the customer relations department in the old Altoona General Office. Gentleman in the back was T. Lamar Reed, who was the manager of customer relations, and his secretary was Teresa Iavoni, and that's me in the front, of course, and Nancy Feather. Back in the 1950s, we used to give out those silver dollar bonuses for a good operating ratio, and we actually handed out bags containing 50 silver dollars to all the employees. And this group here, by memory, I think it's left to right are Billy Cunningham, Lou Green, Junie Miller, Bob Fields, Bob Brubaker, I think, and their dock foreman, Kenny Miller. That's taken in the Altoona Maintenance Department up at the old building up on 7th Avenue, and that's a mechanic by the name of Max Lampenfeld. This was after our guys had won the intercompany rodeos and then went on to the tri-state, and that fellow receiving the award is Glenn Allison, or Sparky Allison, as he was much better known, over the road driver. That's another big old autocar tractor. I think that's number 22. Glenn Wible told me that this was also one that had been repossessed, and WW bought it used. There were 2 tractors, number 21 and 22. But that was one of the very, very early trucks. That would have been in use by Ward Trucking probably in 1931 or 1932. This gentleman's name was August Gus Gerlitz. He managed our North Bergen, New Jersey terminal. This picture was taken in the 1930s of one of the company's original tractor-trailer units, and when I look at that, the trailer in the back always reminds me of a tin coffee can for some reason. This was also during the Jobs for Joe's campaign, and that's Bill Ward again on the right presenting what we called a spark plug award to Stan Truby. Stan at that time was I guess he was called the president or CEO of the William F. Gable Company. This is Marvin Goss. He was the manager of our terminal at Johnstown. This picture was taken following a driver's meeting at the Altoona terminal. Left to right on here are Ronnie Wible, who just unfortunately passed away very recently, Dale Knorr, Ron Wilson, Mo Baker, and Don Wible. Well, this was taken on the day that we officially opened the new bunk room at our North Bergen, New Jersey terminal for the road drivers. Obviously, W.W. Ward is handling the keys, and the 4 road drivers pictured here from the left are Al Giosa, Blasty Myers, Ron McCleary, and Red Messner. This is Marvin Jake Kelly, who was a long-time employee, 40-plus years. And the pin he's wearing there was a program we had for 1 full year called I Will do whatever's necessary. This again was taken on the groundbreaking celebration. I don't recall the gentleman's name to the left. He was, I believe, with International Harvester. Then William W. Ward and his wife, Dorothy Ward, holding the shovel. Congressman Jimmy Van Zandt and our maintenance manager, Bill Adams. WJ. Well, that was one of WW's brainstorms, that he was always a big promoter of the city of Altoona and Blair County, and this was one that was, this particular poster was done in Greenwood. He worked with Morgan Signs and came up with that scheme. This was a straight truck driver. I happen to remember that picture. A former driver called Jim Kelly, who was Jake's brother, Jake's younger brother. Jim at that time handled all the deliveries to downtown 11th and 12th Avenues when business was really bustling over there. He'd take 1 load out in the morning, come back and have lunch, and take a 2nd load over in the afternoon. Many of our people attending an annual company picnic down at Bland's Park in Tipton many years ago. That included all the people based in Altoona, the office people, terminal drivers, dock men, maintenance men, road drivers. That was one of our famous pie eating contests at a company picnic. Christmas parties we had at the old Penn Alto Hotel when we had people from Altoona terminal, from Du Bois, Johnstown, and Harrisburg. W.W. Ward and 3 of the office gals, Nancy Foreman, then sitting in the background, now Nancy Hill, and Judy Kephart on the right, now Judy Dinas, and the other gal worked in the traffic department. I can't tell you what her name was. That was taken at a Christmas party in Altoona in 1958. And the magician in the center called up for 4 volunteers. Joe Stuckey on the left there was a road driver. Bill Spangler was a Harrisburg driver. The fellow on the far right is Jim Nash, an Altoona driver, and the other fellow on the right-hand side of the microphone was Bob Harris, a Du Bois driver. Well, this is back, I'm sure, at the original Jobs for Joe's campaign that W.W. Ward was the main cog in setting that whole thing up. And in this particular one, he's accepting a check from a representative of the former Pennsylvania Shoe Company in Altoona. I don't recall her name, but the plant manager's name was Bob Forshner. That's Bob on the right. That was taken at our original Ward Tower, our general office building that had the terminal in the back of it. That would have been taken in 1950. All the employees at that time got dressed up and came in. We took a group photograph. That was one of our mechanics, Edgar Laird, doing some welding to one of the tractor cabs in for repair. That would have been taken in 1959 at the old Altoona terminal. That was the old Quonset hut terminal up at the Du Bois terminal, the original terminal up there. And it's interesting to note that nice big shiny black Cadillac in the front. That was WW's favorite car. This picture would have been taken sometime in the late 1940s, and I really like this. Looks like the old-fashioned lineup. On the left was a gentleman by the name of Bill Murray, who at that time I think his title was general manager. Then Gus Gerlitz, our North Bergen or Weehawken, New Jersey terminal manager. W.W. Ward, Bob Kelly, Bill Adams, who was our maintenance supervisor, and George Ide, who was at that time the Altoona terminal manager. This was taken sometime in the late 1940s at the Penalta Hotel. It's one of those pictures that's not dated. W.W. Ward on the left was presenting some awards to Harrisburg driver Pop Ballsbaugh and his wife. This was the dispatch office at the terminal on 7th Avenue and 2nd Street. And fellows on here, left to right, were Jim Moranti, who was our OS&D clerk, and I'm at a loss to remember the next fellow's name. Glenn Wible's in the background there on the telephone. Young Bill Adams is on the right. Standing looking out the window was a rate clerk Al Piccarelli and Bob Brennecke looking in. That's a bunch of road drivers taken, I think, back at the old Weehawken terminal. That would had to have been before 1950 when we opened North Bergen. That was taken in 1966 at the groundbreaking for our present transportation complex in Greenwood. W.W. Ward behind the microphone, and from left to right were Mike Ward, Rick Ward, Mrs. Dorothy Ward, and G. Bill.
The early years of Ward Trucking remind us of the people and places that were shaped by a powerful entrepreneurial vision. A business that focused on both customers and employees. The result was a success built of hard work and perseverance. And to this day, an ongoing commitment to put people first. And that is the legacy of Ward Trucking.